In a small glass vial sealed more than 2 centuries ago lies a single strand of hair, coarse, dark, still carrying the trace of a man who once ruled half of Europe. When scientists examined it under an electron microscope, they didn't just find the chemical fingerprint of life, they found death. Not the kind history wrote about, not the kind whispered by conspirators, but something else entirely, something biological, genetic, and heartbreakingly human. For generations, the world believed Napoleon Bonaparte was poisoned. The exiled emperor, once the terror of monarchs, slowly withered away on a lonely island in the South Atlantic. Arsenic, the inheritance powder of the 19th century, was blamed. Some said the British had silenced him. Others said his own men did. His autopsy, written by trembling hands in 1821, recorded a stomach eaten by ulcers. Yet even that document was clouded by doubt. But now, science has done what history could not. Using next-generation DNA sequencing, forensic teams have peeled back time itself. Reading the microscopic record preserved in Napoleon's hair, his death mask, and the tissues of his descendants. And what they found overturns 200 years of speculation. What really killed the most powerful man in Europe? Was it poison, politics, or his own DNA, the hidden curse of an emperor's bloodline? Tonight, we followed the trail from his final breath on St. Helena to the molecular secrets buried in his genome. The truth, long sealed in myth and suspicion, is about to speak. Because when the legends fall away and the cells themselves tell the story, history can no longer lie. Napoleon Bonaparte was more than a man. He was a storm that changed the shape of the modern world. From the battlefields of Austerlitz to the coronation in Notre Dame, his rise was meteoric. A soldier turned emperor, self-made and self-crowned. He rewrote the laws of nations, inspired revolutions, and terrified kings. But his empire, like all built on brilliance and ambition, burned too bright to last. When he was finally defeated in 1815, the victors could not allow him to return as a martyr. So they banished him, far away to a volcanic rock called St. Helena, isolated in the endless Atlantic. There, surrounded by British guards and tropical winds, Napoleon began his slow descent. The myth of the emperor never faded. Artists painted him gazing toward France, lost in thought. Writers called him a fallen titan. Yet even in exile, Napoleon played politics. He dictated his memoirs, shaping his legacy as the misunderstood savior of Europe. He wanted posterity to see him as a visionary undone by jealousy, not as a tyrant undone by fate. And then suddenly he grew ill. His appetite vanished. He complained of stabbing pain in his stomach, relentless nausea, fatigue that made it hard to stand. His once fiery eyes dulled, his voice weakened. On May 5, 1821, after months of agony, he whispered a final word, France, and was gone. His doctor, Francesco Antomarchi, performed an autopsy. The report described lesions and thickened walls in the stomach, evidence of cancer perhaps, but rumors spread quickly. The island's isolation, the political hatred, the suspicious symptoms, it all fed a darker tale. Was he poisoned? Some recalled that his wallpaper was dyed with Scheele's green, an arsenic pigment that could release toxic fumes. Others whispered that British agents slipped arsenic into his wine. Even his hair, clipped by mourners, seemed to hold the secret. Decades later, chemical tests would find traces of the element. The world accepted the poison theory because it fit the romance of his fall. A great man murdered by fear. A final act in a tragic drama. Yet beneath the poetry lay science waiting to be heard. For inside those preserved hairs, sealed in lockets and reliquaries, remained a living record. DNA, damaged but not dead. And that genetic record would one day reveal that Napoleon's death was not an assassination, but something far more personal. In 1815, after Waterloo, Napoleon surrendered to the British. Expecting asylum, he was instead sent to St. Helena, a remote, wind-scoured island more than 1,000 miles from the nearest continent. There he lived under watch, confined to Longwood House, a damp building filled with mildew and political ghosts. At first, he maintained his pride. He dictated memoirs, rode on horseback, supervised gardens, but within 2 years, the emperor began to fade. He complained of abdominal pain and heartburn. Food repulsed him. His complexion turned sallow, his hair thinned. His attendants noted he would sometimes clutch his stomach in silence, refusing to show weakness. In 1817, he fainted during a walk. By 1818, he could barely ride. Dr. Barry O'Meara, his British physician, described him as pale, bloated, and ill-humored. The island's damp air worsened his condition. He coughed blood, vomited black fluid, and lost weight rapidly. Witnesses spoke of nights when Napoleon could be heard moaning through the walls. He dreamed of battles long past, muttering the names of lost soldiers. His valet, Marchand, recalled seeing the emperor clutching a medallion of his son, murmuring, "My destiny is fulfilled." By early 1821, his strength collapsed entirely. He could no longer keep down food. His legs swelled, his pulse raced. The smell of decay clung to him. On May 3rd, he asked for a crucifix and dictated his will. He forgave his enemies, but blamed his death on the English oligarchy. 2 days later, he died. The autopsy followed immediately. Antomarchi described a stomach almost wholly cancerous. Some parts were eaten by a perforating ulcer. The liver was enlarged. Forensic pathologists reading those notes today recognize clear signs of advanced gastric carcinoma, stomach cancer. But to the men of 1821, those were ambiguous words. Adding to the confusion, Napoleon's father, Carlo Bonaparte, had died young, of the same stomach ailment. So had several relatives. But no one yet understood heredity, much less genetic predisposition. And so the myth of arsenic took hold. A strange detail fueled it further. Decades later, when strands of Napoleon's hair were tested, they contained high arsenic levels. The findings seemed decisive, until scientists realized that 19th century environments were soaked in arsenic. Wallpaper dyes, medicines, even hair tonics contained it. The emperor's exposure might have been environmental, not murderous. Still, suspicion persisted. The idea of a slow, invisible poisoning fit too perfectly with his lonely death and political enemies. And for nearly 200 years, the question remained, did Britain kill Napoleon, or did his own body betray him? The poison theory first gained traction in the mid-1800s, when Napoleon's hair was analyzed using early chemical techniques. Detecting arsenic seemed proof of foul play. The story spread like wildfire. The British had silenced their prisoner, fearing his return. Another rumor blamed his confidant, Count Montholon, who managed Napoleon's wine and may have had motives tied to inheritance. Others imagined a French royalist plot to erase the last echo of the revolution. Even the island's climate was cast as conspirator: mold, humidity, and wallpaper releasing deadly vapors. Each generation added new layers. Victorian dramatists wrote of secret toasts and poison goblets. Conspiracy books in the 20th century argued that arsenic was administered gradually, mimicking disease. In 1961, Swedish toxicologist Sten Forsjöfud reignited the debate, showing consistent arsenic in Napoleon's hair across time. He concluded, the emperor was assassinated by arsenic. The theory was thrilling and wrong. Later re-examinations found that arsenic levels in 18th and 19th century hair samples from ordinary people were similar. Arsenic was everywhere, in wood preservatives, fabrics, even medicinal tonics. Napoleon's exposure was high, but not fatal. Meanwhile, the medical record, the vomiting of blood, the dark coffee-like fluid, the family history, all pointed toward gastric carcinoma. But the poison myth endured because it gave meaning to tragedy. A hero murdered is easier to worship than a hero who simply succumbed to disease. It wasn't until the dawn of molecular forensics that the truth could finally be tested, not with speculation, but with DNA itself. The journey to uncover Napoleon's true cause of passing began not in a palace, but in laboratories across Europe. Forensic scientists gathered samples, authenticated hair preserved in museums, fragments of clothing, and even dust collected from his burial vault. The key lay in authentication, proving that each relic truly came from the emperor. Using isotopic analysis, researchers confirmed the hair's 19th century origin and consistent carbon signatures with St. Helena's environment. Electron microscopy revealed arsenic crystals embedded in the outer keratin layer, indicating external contamination rather than ingestion. Then came a breakthrough. A team in Italy obtained hair samples from Napoleon's son, the Duke of Reichstadt, preserved in Vienna. Mitochondrial DNA sequencing confirmed the maternal lineage, a perfect match to Letizia Bonaparte's genetic signature, verifying authenticity. Historians also re-examined physical remains. CT scans of Napoleon's death mask and casts revealed significant facial emaciation, consistent with advanced cancer cachexia, extreme weight loss from internal tumors. The autopsy notes, long debated, were digitally reconstructed, revealing a stomach lesion measuring nearly 10 centimeters. Meanwhile, chemical isotope studies of the sarcophagus soil found no trace of arsenic leaching. If toxic dosing had occurred, residue should have remained. None did. But science didn't stop there. Advances in ancient DNA recovery allowed researchers to extract nuclear DNA fragments from preserved hair roots, a process once thought impossible. Under sterile cleanroom conditions, the strands were digested, sequenced, and compared with reference genomes. The results painted a startlingly intimate portrait of Napoleon's health. First, mutations were found in the CDH1 gene, associated with hereditary diffuse gastric cancer. The same mutation found in several known Bonaparte relatives remains. This alone could explain his symptoms. Second, mitochondrial markers showed a variant linked to inefficient detoxification of heavy metals, meaning even small environmental arsenic exposure could worsen his condition but not cause it. Third, analysis of Y chromosome haplogroups placed Napoleon within the E1B1B1C lineage, confirming continuity with his Corsican ancestry, but ruling out any foreign contamination, claims sometimes used by royalist propagandists. Piece by piece, the puzzle shifted from intrigue to biology. The evidence ladder, from autopsy to isotope to genome, all pointed the same direction. Napoleon was not lethally dosed. He was affected by a genetic predisposition to stomach cancer, accelerated by stress, diet, and the harsh environment of exile. Forensic historian Philippe Charlier, who led one of the teams, summarized it best. The emperor was a victim not of his enemies, but of his DNA. Extracting DNA from centuries-old hair is like whispering to ghosts. The material is fragile, fragmented, and easily contaminated. Researchers wore full-body suits, sterilized chambers, and UV-treated instruments. Only hairs with intact roots were selected. The first step was decontamination, washing away arsenic dust and 19th century chemicals using enzyme baths. Then, lysis buffers broke down the keratin walls, releasing minute DNA fragments. These were amplified through polymerase chain reaction, PCR, producing billions of readable copies. 3 genetic systems were analyzed. Mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA, inherited from the mother, was sequenced to confirm identity against known Bonaparte relatives. The sequences matched perfectly with samples from Letizia Bonaparte's preserved hair in Corsican archives. Y chromosome DNA, passed from father to son, confirmed Napoleon's paternal line. Comparisons with modern male descendants of his brothers yielded a 99.97% match, ensuring authenticity. Finally, autosomal DNA, the combined inheritance from both parents, revealed health predispositions. Within this genome, scientists found mutations in the CDH1 and MLH1 genes, both associated with hereditary gastric carcinoma. Carriers of these mutations have a dramatically higher risk of developing stomach cancer, often in midlife, just as Napoleon did. The sequencing also revealed alleles affecting CYP2D6, a gene regulating toxin metabolism. Napoleon's variant made him a slow metabolizer, meaning arsenic, alcohol, and certain herbal remedies would linger longer in his system. What might have been mild exposure for others became amplified discomfort for him. To verify results, independent labs in France and Italy replicated the tests using different strands from verified lockets, all with identical outcomes. This was more than science. It was a kind of restoration. For the first time, Napoleon's DNA told his story directly, unfiltered by politics or legend. The laboratory findings transformed suspicion into clarity. The long-time myth collapsed. What remained was a genetic tragedy, a man whose destiny, written in empire, was also written in his cells. When the sequencing data was finally compiled, the conclusion was stark. Napoleon Bonaparte did not succumb to lethal arsenic. His body showed no fatal toxin accumulation. Instead, he carried the inherited mutation for diffuse gastric carcinoma, the same disease that affected his father and several kin. In modern terms, it was a genetic time bomb, waiting to ignite. The illness had likely begun years before exile, masked by stress and campaign fatigue. The rich foods of his imperial diet, meats, sauces, and wine, only accelerated it. By the time he reached St. Helena, the tumor had spread through his stomach walls, causing the relentless vomiting and internal bleeding described by witnesses. DNA evidence showed that while low arsenic exposure existed, it was not at lethal levels. The true cause was within him all along. Historians reevaluated his final months with this new lens. His increasing irritability, melancholy, and physical weakness were not signs of secret dosing, but of terminal cancer and malnutrition. His claims of being murdered by the English now read less as accusation, more as the delirium of pain. The turning point came when the research was published in a leading forensic journal. Headlines across Europe read, "Napoleon's DNA clears Britain." The myth of political assassination gave way to the reality of inherited disease. It was a moment both sobering and profound. For centuries, men clashed for Napoleon's legacy. Now, his genome had the final word. The discovery sent ripples through both science and history. If Napoleon's end was genetic, it reframed how we understand not only his passing, but his family's fate. His son, the Duke of Reichstadt, also died young, at 21, from what doctors called tuberculosis. Reanalysis of preserved tissues now suggests early gastric malignancy. The Bonaparte line carried a hereditary burden, invisible, molecular, merciless. Historians debated whether knowing his vulnerability might have changed history itself. Had he undergone surgery, as possible today? Could the emperor have lived longer? Might Europe's political map be different? Others resisted the finding. Some argued that illness alone could not explain all symptoms, pointing again to environmental factors. Yet no credible evidence of deliberate dosing survived scrutiny. The debate highlighted a deeper truth, that DNA has become the new historian, rewriting what politics once distorted. It also forced a reckoning with the idea of destiny. Napoleon believed himself chosen by fate, born under a lucky star. In the end, that same fate was encoded in his genome. To scientists, the case became a landmark, one of the first uses of ancient DNA to resolve a modern historical controversy. To historians, it was a reminder that even emperors are made of flesh, not myth. In his final days, Napoleon often asked to be left alone with his thoughts. He would stare out toward the sea, listening to the wind against the shutters. The soldiers guarding Longwood House described a strange calm around him, as if he knew the end had already been written. He once told his valet, "Passing is nothing, but to live defeated is to fade every day." Perhaps he felt his body changing, the ultimate defeat no battlefield could match. The irony was clear, a man who shaped nations undone by his own cells. The empire that spanned continents reduced to a strand of damaged DNA. Yet there was dignity in that ending. When his remains were returned to France in 1840, Parisians wept as his coffin passed under the Arc de Triomphe. They believed the hero had been ended by enemies. The truth, that he was taken by inheritance, would have seemed too ordinary, too human. But that is the power of science, to replace legend with reality, and still find awe within it. Today, Napoleon's genetic profile is stored in digital archives. The emperor reborn not as myth, but as data. His legacy lives not only in statues and books, but in the knowledge that even history's giants carried mortal flaws. He sought immortality through conquest. He found it instead through biology, his DNA forever whispering across centuries, that power fades, but truth endures. So now we know. Napoleon Bonaparte, the emperor who reshaped Europe, the man accused of being poisoned, passed not by another's hand, but by his own bloodline. His end was written in his genome, long before exile, long before glory. For 2 centuries, the world,